All right, guys. Here comes part 2 of the Cold War flashpoint lessons. Arg. All right. Second big Cold War flashpoint comes in Vietnam, something some of your parents or neighbors may know about. And all the way back in World War II, there was a Vietnamese communist named Ho Chi Minh. Think of him as like a Mao Zedong Jr. And Ho Chi Minh helped organize the defenses against the Japanese invasion and used guerrilla war tactics where he knew he couldn't stand toe-to-toe. So you hit, you do some destruction, and then you fade back into the jungle. It hides your lack of numbers. When I was real little watching The Wizard of Oz, when the flying monkeys are marching into the witch's house after they captured Dorothy and Toto, I always thought they were going, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, but I learned out later that wasn't what they were saying. But just a little bit of comedy there for you. So, by the end of World War II, Ho Chi Minh controls much of northern Vietnam, and he is well known amongst the Vietnamese people there. Well, in 1946, the French government wanted to try and regain or retain part of their old colonial empire. The part they picked was in Vietnam at the time called French Indochina. However, there was a big nationalist movement in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese did not want to be ruled by France. And so the Vietnamese began to resist all French efforts to reclaim their old colonial territory from years before. And remember, all of Southeast Asia had pretty much been imperialized. One of the leaders of the Vietnamese nationalism was Ho Chi Minh himself. And he enjoyed a strong show of support from the Vietnamese peasant people. And he uses the same tactics against the French that he used to help fight the Japanese in World War II, which made him a folk hero in Vietnam. So the French were finally forced to give up and leave French Indochina, aka Vietnam, in 1954. Well, unfortunately, because of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, it is going to directly interfere with Vietnam's quest for their own independence. The Truman Doctrine and the containment policy have been written down, and the United States wants to stop the spread of communism everywhere. My God, is it hot in here, just as a side note. The United States did not mind, again, new countries becoming independent, as long as they weren't communist. And so all across Southeast Asia, countries want to modernize. They want to go through the Industrial Revolution, so to speak. This include Cambodia, little country of Laos, and Vietnam. But they lack the necessary experience. They don't know how to govern themselves. For so long, they've been under someone else's thumb that Vietnam all of a sudden finds themselves as a participant, albeit unwillingly, in the Cold War. After Vietnam won independence from the French in 1954, they found themselves caught between the United States and the Soviet Union. And during a conference in Switzerland, the Soviet Union and Western leaders agree on a temporary division of Vietnam along the 17th parallel, very similar to what they had done in Korea. The United States will back South Vietnamese leader Ngo Dinh Diem, while in North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh became the leader of the communist government. Other Southeast Asian nations like Cambodia and Laos became fully independent. They were their own functioning independent countries. And the agreement between the Americans and the Soviets called for Vietnam to hold free elections in 1956 to decide which way the people wanted to go and reunite the two separate halves of the country. Vietnam was either going to be run by a communist dictatorship or Western democracy. But the Western leaders started thinking, oh crap, what if those commies win? What if they win? What are we going to do? And the idea of the domino theory, if one country falls, all the rest, ping, 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 are going to fall as well. So South Vietnamese President Diem in the United States, concerned that the communists might win the election, they decide to thwart that. And so this begins Vietnam being involved in several phases of war, pretty much from 1950, well, since World War II, all the way through 1975, there's constant fighting. Ho Chi Minh wanted Vietnam, oops, Bill Melega. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Bethany. Oh, she's a sophomore this year. Yeah. No, she's not. Yeah, at school tomorrow? Or at the conference tomorrow? Okay, yeah, let me see, can I talk to her teachers real quick and make sure everything is going okay, and I'll bring her with me? All right. Okay, will do, ma'am. All right, thank you. No problem. All right, bye. Okay, sorry for that little conference. I forget what I was saying. Constant state of war until 1975. Ho Chi Minh wanted Vietnam to be reunited as a single country. So he began to support communist citizens in South Vietnam known as the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were rebels trying to overthrow the democratic government. They are trying to make sure that Ngo Dinh Diem's government does not flounder. The United States sent massive aid packages of supplies and then sent military advisors in the 1960s. President Kennedy will expand the U.S. involvement in Vietnam throughout his term in office. More and more men and more supplies get shipped over. It was supposed to be just advisors, but then it becomes soldiers. Nearly 500,000 men are sent to Vietnam. And Presidents Kennedy and Johnson will keep upsurging sorry, the telephone call kind of rattled me here. Will keep surging forward the amount of men and material, escalating the war for long term. And so this localized struggle for Vietnam quickly turns into a major battlefield conflict. More soldiers are sent and needed to fight these hated communists. In 1964, there's a major campaign to bomb North Vietnamese cities and to deforest the jungles of Vietnam. However, the massive armament of the United States, no matter what technological advancement we had, no matter napalm and firebombings and technology, was enough to stop Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Cong rebels. By the mid-60s, as I said, 500,000 American soldiers had been sent. And Ho Chi Minh keeps receiving support from the Soviet Union in terms of weapons and supplies. No Soviet troops were sent, but money and weapons. no matter what we do to try and help Vietnam, it doesn't work. And Ho Chi Minh and his communist forces prove difficult to defeat. By the late 60s, early 70s, the numbers of Americans killed in Vietnam had begun to swing opinion against it. If you go to D.C., there's the famous Vietnam Veterans Memorial, black, marble. 58,000 names are on there. One of them, my uncle, just shown and displayed. 14 years of war. People had had enough. Americans were strongly anti-war, and President Richard Nixon will arrange a ceasefire and negotiate a treaty in 1973. The South Vietnamese capital of Saigon will fall in April of 1975, and it will be renamed Ho Chi Minh City in honor of their great leader. And Ho Chi Minh's success is a striking parallel to that of Mao Zedong. Ho Chi Minh was popular and had led guerrilla victories against the powerful Japanese and U.S. invasions. Ho Chi Minh's new government began to rebuild Vietnam in the hopes of recovering from the destruction of nearly 30 years of constant warfare. Vietnam is going to struggle. It will be economically poor. There will be economic sanctions. It wasn't until a couple years ago that flights began to fly, international flights from the United States into Ho Chi Minh City. But communism hasn't really worked there, and the Vietnamese are quickly and strongly becoming a more powerful economic country, a leader in Southeast Asia. But it comes at a high cost. So, next door to Vietnam is our next flashpoint, probably our last one of the day. As the Vietnam War drags on and on and on, the neighboring country of Cambodia, where we had a classmate, if you're in 6th period, go to earlier this year, becomes affected as the North Vietnamese communists were shuttling men and supplies through Cambodia to South Vietnam. It was like a shortcut. And when the war ends in 1975, Cambodians who believed in the communist ideology overthrew the government. And they set up a new government called the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge was led by a dictator named Pol Pot. Now, Pol Pot wanted to erase all remnants of Western ideology in Cambodia and culture from his country. He saw urbanization and Western living as evil and corruption. So he forcibly relocates all of his citizens out of the urban areas out into the countryside and makes them become farmers and agricultural work. As a result, thousands will starve to death. Those who complained or weren't working hard enough were simply executed and shot right there. Cambodian deaths went over the 1 million mark. And by 1979, things had become so bad in Cambodia that Vietnam was forced to invade to save the citizens. Vietnam has to stay and police and keep an eye on Cambodia, and to the United Nations will send in peacekeepers finally in the 1990s. That's how bad things were. And the UN peacekeepers had to remain alert from attacks from Khmer Rouge guerrilla fighters who faded into the jungles and kept coming back as a force of destabilization throughout Cambodia. So as we leave the war-torn period, there are multiple historical flashpoints, primarily in Asia, Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, that will help define the Cold War era, as the United States and the Soviet Union will vie intense competition for ideology and territory. Soviet Union wants to spread and export the ideas of communism, where we want to close it off where it is. And while the two nations don't actively fight each other, it is the quest for dominance that will be the source of death and destruction for so many people across the globe. The one-time allies in World War II will continue to be at odds until the Soviet Union will finally collapse in 1991. And during this whole time, there will be the period of decolonization in Africa and Asia. Some of the high points I will try and hit for you guys Thursday and maybe Friday when we get back. So that's it for this session. If it's a little short, please get out a book, get out a DBQ and study, and be quiet while everyone around us is working. I got to go do some quick errands as a result of that phone call, and we'll see what happens. I'll see you guys Thursday.